Welcome back now for the news in detail. We start from China, whose President Xi Jinping says he is watching the situation in Kashmir and supports Pakistan in issues of core interest. He was meeting Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan in Beijing. Both leaders discussed the entire spectrum of bilateral relations, the regional situation and matters of mutual interest. Earlier meeting Chinese Premier Li Keqiang, Prime Minister Khan said the world must act to help the people of Indian-occupied Kashmir. The Chinese Foreign Ministry says Beijing hopes India and Pakistan will address the Kashmir dispute through dialogue. Premier Li assured Khan of his country's support on all regional issues. The two leaders also agreed that the second phase of the bilateral free trade agreement will create more trade opportunities. For more on this, we are joined by our Beijing correspondent, Patrick Falk. Thank you, Patrick. Patrick, tell us about Prime Minister Khan's meeting with President Xi Jinping.
Well, as you mentioned, we are told that the two sides talked about bilateral relations, regional issues, as well as matters of mutual interest. Prime Minister Khan congratulated President Xi on the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic and also talked about some of the difficult economic times that Pakistan had been through and thanked China for its financial support. He also made a point of highlighting that China's friendship and support had been without condition. Of course, there was, as we understand, a focus on security issues, although we don't have an awful lot of details about what was discussed exactly. There were previous reports that said that Pakistan's army chief may have attended the meeting as well, which suggests that there was a particular focus on this. The other thing, of course, is that much has been made about why China chose to say so late on or reveal so late on details of President Xi's visit to India. Whether or not that has anything to do with Prime Minister Khan's visit, we're not entirely clear. But Foreign Minister Qureshi had previously said that the idea of this visit was to take each other into confidence ahead of President Xi's visit to India. The Chinese side will keep Pakistan informed of any relevant matters that come up during that visit.
Right, Patrick, we both know China and Pakistan both have a big stake in what is currently happening in Indian-occupied Kashmir. So how has this figured in Chinese officials' comments during Khan's visit?
Well, I think you touched on it just a moment ago. Yesterday, Premier Li said that China supported Pakistan's rights to legitimately defend its national sovereignty and territorial integrity, although you have to understand that perhaps before President Xi's visit to China, they may not want to talk too much about what China's position is exactly, particularly if it is forceful on the matter. At the same time, we are hearing from Indian reports that they don't necessarily intend for this topic of discussion to be raised during President Xi's visit, although they said that they would help the Chinese side to understand their position if it is indeed tabled between President Modi and Prime Minister Modi and President Xi when they do meet each other.
Right, thank you, Patrick Falk, for the latest updates from China now. Moving on, all main political parties in Indian-occupied Kashmir have boycotted the first ever local body election scheduled for 24th of October. India's top opposition party, Congress, also reversed its decision after pledging to participate in the polls last week. Party spokesperson Ravinder Sharma says the decision was taken in the wake of the arrest of thousands of Kashmiri politicians by New Delhi. Sharma expressed strong reservations over the current political and security environment in the occupied valley. The NC, the PDP and CPIM had already expressed reservations over participating in the BDC polls. To talk more on this, we are joined now from Mumbai by our correspondent Rebecca Bandhan. Rebecca, it has been widely reported the Indian National Congress will not take part in the Jammu BDC elections on 24th of October. So could this mean only that BJP and independent candidates would contest them? And how much credibility will these elections now have?
Well, firstly, these Bloc Development Council elections in Kashmir are highly significant, given the fact that they are the first polls that are taking place following the Indian government's decision to revoke Kashmir's special status, which, of course, took away significant autonomy. Following that, there's been a near blackout on communications. There have been protests and so on. There's been a lot of controversy around that decision. So these polls that are coming up later this month on the 24th are highly significant. Now, it seems to have taken some people by surprise that the Congress has now, it seems, decided to reverse its decision to take part in these polls, given the fact that just a few days ago, just recently, Congress had said that it wanted to participate because of the fact that it wanted to strengthen democracy, and it didn't want the elections, the polls, to be a walkover for the BJP, which is the ruling party in India, of course. But now it seems to have gone back on that. It seems to be saying that it hasn't really had the interest in participation in Kashmir. People are not coming forward, and that there are, of course, a number of leaders that are still detained. So that's one of the major issues there, and that seems to be a factor behind its decision. But the BJP party just a couple of days ago was saying that it expects to secure a 90% majority. Now, I mean, something like that is looking increasingly likely as we've seen these parties backing out. It seems that it doesn't really have much competition.
Rebecca, we also know senior Congress leaders from Jammu met with their Kashmiri colleagues, including former Chief Minister Farooq Abdullah last week. So how much of an issue has the detention of mainstream Kashmiri politicians become in India's national politics?
It absolutely has become an issue, and it's been criticised by the Congress. It's been criticised by other parties as well, including the DMK in Tamil Nadu. These leaders were arrested under the Public Safety Act. That in itself is quite controversial because it's a law that allows detention of people for up to 2 years without trial. So that's been a major issue here, and a source of a lot of concern among not only other opposition political parties, but also the population, the public. It's something that's been criticised quite widely in the international media as well, especially as we're approaching these polls and so on. We can see how something like this is now having an impact and how it could have an effect on democracy. The Indian government, of course, says it has its own reasons for taking such measures, such as trying to maintain security in the region, but it's definitely become a major issue here and quite a big talking point.
Rebecca Bandhan, thank you very much for your latest updates. Now, moving on, Iran has accepted Pakistan and Iraq's offer to mediate in disputes between Tehran and Riyadh. Responding to the mediation offers, Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said Iran is ready to talk with Saudi Arabia on all issues. Zarif said Tehran has always been ready to cooperate with its neighbors for regional security. Pakistan's Prime Minister Imran Khan met Saudi Arabia's Mohammed bin Salman and Iran's President Hassan Rouhani at the UNGA summit. During their meeting, Khan was asked by Crown Prince Salman to mediate between Saudi Arabia and Iran. It's time for a short break. Stay tuned with Indus News. Welcome back. The UN says 39 civilians were killed in US airstrikes on several drug manufacturing facilities in western Afghanistan in May. The Pentagon had claimed there were no civilian casualties. The UN's Afghanistan Assistant Mission report says the victims were mostly women and children. UNAMA said the air raids were a violation of international law as they did not meet the definition of legitimate military objectives. The US forces have rejected the findings, insisting its precision strikes had accurately targeted meth labs. They said the strikes did not cause deaths or injuries to non-combatants. Meanwhile, Turkey says its forces will cross the Syrian border sometime today. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan's communication director Fahrettin Altun says the Free Syrian Army will join the operation. Altun says the US withdrawal of troops made way for the Turkish incursion. He's told the Kurdish militants in Syria to either defect or face Ankara's troops. It says the military struck the Syrian-Iraqi border to prevent Kurdish forces from using the route to reinforce the region. In the meantime, the Kurdish-led SDF said 3 ISIS suicide bombers attacked its military positions in northeast Raqqa. The US President Donald Trump said any unnecessary fighting by Turkey will have devastating consequences for its economy. Iran and Russia have asked Turkey to show restraint and avoid military action in northeastern Syria. This comes after Turkey deployed its troops and tanks to the border with Syria for a military operation against the Syrian Democratic Forces. In a statement, President Hassan Rouhani said Tehran understands Ankara's concerns over its southern borders. However, he said a military operation should not be the priority. He went on to say the US troops must leave the region. Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Syria's territorial integrity must be preserved. Earlier, the European Union warned the military operation in Syria could push a new wave of refugees towards Europe. Now, the 5 European members of the United Nations Security Council have urged North Korea to give up its nuclear arsenal and demanded Pyongyang to end its ballistic missile program. European envoys issued a statement after a meeting of the 15-member Security Council on North Korea. The meeting was requested by Germany, Britain and France after Pyongyang test-fired a ballistic missile last week. Meanwhile, Russia's envoy to Vienna, Mikhail Ulyanov, says his country is concerned over North Korea's threat to end negotiations with the US. Ulyanov said a more creative approach is needed to ensure Pyongyang steps in the right direction. The US and North Korea held nuclear talks in Stockholm on the 5th of October, but Pyongyang declared the dialogue a failure, while Washington said it laid a good foundation for the future meetings. Russia says a ministerial meeting to be held in the Normandy format is being discussed and could happen soon. Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Sergei Vershinin says the Steinmeier formula became an important step towards resolving problems with Ukraine. Kiev has agreed to the Steinmeier formula, which gives the Donbass region special status and allows it to hold its own elections. Vershinin says Ukraine still needs to satisfy other commitments in the Minsk agreement. Kiev is accusing Russia of stalling the Normandy talks by adding more conditions even after Steinmeier formula agreement. Now in France, farmers around the country are blocking highways with their tractors in protest at the government's agricultural policies. The farmers are calling for just trade policies and have denounced the government's treatment of the agricultural sector. We have more details in this report.
French farmers have been concerned ever since the country's parliament approved an EU-Canada trade deal in July. A road blockade is the first in a series of demonstrations planned by 2 French farmers' unions.
It is important that the consumer takes action, meaning he must be coherent with what he wants, what he purchases, and this is very important.
Farmers have been angered by another trade deal signed between the EU and the Mercosur bloc. Under the deal, they say France has agreed to food imports that will put them into poverty. The French Transport and Environment Minister has sided with farmers.
I cannot endorse agri-bashing. I think farmers must be respected, for their job is difficult. And we must accompany them in adopting practices that are more environmentally friendly.
The French Yellow Vest protests have only recently lost steam after they began in October last year. But with the farmers' protest movement just starting, it seems French President Emmanuel Macron's government still has a long way to go to calm its critics and solve the unrest.
The World Bank says global poverty will only increase further because of the tightening of trade tensions around the world. Chief economist Penelope Goldberg says investments have been put on hold, choking cash to boost economic growth. Goldberg says the current investment throughout will put some countries into perpetual poverty. She says it could also reverse the progress made by developing countries, with regions such as Africa being the worst hit. The US-China trade war, involving hundreds of billions of dollars in two-way trade, is at the center of global dispute. She said Washington's recent friction with the EU changing rules over US trade with Canada and Mexico alongside Brexit are making the crisis worse. The World Bank and IMF are among forecasters who have cut projections for growth this year and the next amid worsening trade wars. European stock markets have opened positive despite increasing pessimism about trade talks between the US and China. Investors have been spooked by the US imposition of visa restrictions on some Chinese officials and the banning of leading Chinese tech corporations. Washington took these measures ahead of the resumption of high-level trade negotiations with China tomorrow. Reversing yesterday's losses, the CAC 40 in Paris and Frankfurt DAX index have gained 0.5%. London's FTSE 100 is trading flat. Earlier, most Asian stock markets tracked overnight losses on Wall Street. The Nikkei 225 index in Tokyo and Hong Kong's Hang Seng have shed more than 0.5%, but the Shanghai Composite bucked the trend to gain about 0.5%. Concerns about global growth have driven oil prices down for a third consecutive day. Now let's have a look at the weather updates. Well, that's all for now. For more news and updates, keep watching Indus News.